My reading for us this morning is from an author, Helena Fitzgerald, and I pulled this from a catalog she made of truly terrible coffees. The coffee you get at the corner bodega on certain early mornings, the coffee that you get at terrible meetings, and of course, the part I pulled is church coffee. She says, all coffees are bad. All these coffees are bad, but this is the worst one. She says, I've been going to church for over 4 years now, and I'm still not sure if I believe in God. But I do believe in a bunch of people together in a room drinking bad coffee. The first day Thomas and I went to our church was just after Halloween. And the year that preceded that Sunday had been so bad that I barely remember whole months of it. It got dramatically worse, and then it got better in the way things sometimes do. Somebody in a planning meeting for the church recently said something about churches attracting broken people or weirdos, people who don't fit in other places. And they said this like it was a problem. And sure, I knew what they meant, but I thought, isn't that the only defensible thing about this place? About these places at the end of the day? Another way to say that no one deserves anything is that everyone deserves everything. It was cold in early November 4 years ago, and the ends of my fingers were still chilly enough to thaw against the cardboard cup when Thomas brought me coffee after the service. The coffee was bad. I mean, just so bad, so terrible, but it was warm, which is the best most of us can offer most of the time. And I realized then how few rooms I have stood in, ever, in my whole life, where I didn't feel like I had to prove anything in order to belong there, where I didn't feel like I had to crank up the charm or do a little dance or break out a credible impression of a more competent, more trustworthy, more outgoing, less damaged person in order to belong in that room. The thing about church coffee is that it's free. And that's it. That's the most meaningful thing church does, bigger than scripture and more relevant than sermons. Martin Luther nailing his theses to the door, and all of them just say over and over and over, the coffee in this room is free. We all likely had different reasons for coming to church this morning. And I imagine we all had wildly different reasons for coming to church the first time, whenever that was, however that was. I know a lot of us leave one faith for another. I know a lot of us didn't come from anywhere in particular. Some of us were born and raised UUs, and we moved and needed a new church. Some of us wanted a place to be grounded while we did our justice work. Maybe some of us were brought by friends, intrigued by some other event happening in the building, or maybe we just needed to step in out of the rain and we're hoping for a cup of coffee. And no matter why you came, today or the first time, there is, I think, something that bubbles away beneath all of that. We are here today because we need to be together. It's that simple. We live in a society that promotes independence, but many of us know that what we actually need to do is lean into our interdependence. In a world that ranks us by our productivity or our beauty or our wealth, we know that we need to reaffirm the worth of every person, perhaps most of all ourselves. Those of us who are lonely need to connect, and we need a place to belong. And those of us who aren't lonely still probably need to connect and need a place to belong. And if we just wanted to be with a small group of people who share some interests or are justice causes, there are a lot of other places we could be. And instead we choose church, Sunday after Sunday. One of the main things happening during the Reformation was the idea of the priesthood of all believers, that we all have direct access to God. The great Unitarian theologian and ethicist James Luther Adams called for a prophethood of all believers, acknowledging that we are all called to enact our values in the world around us. But as the Rise but the Spiritual but Not Religious and community ministry show, those two things don't necessarily demand that we gather together on Sunday morning or even any other day of the week. And so I think part of what brings us here together today is the idea that each of us is not only a priest or a prophet, but that each of us are pastors too. We gather because we care for one another, and in turn, we are cared for. And so all that we do in this place and from this place is ultimately rooted in love and care. All of our learning and our teaching, all of our work for social change, even all of our administration and meetings, all of these things are rooted in love, in acknowledging that what we're here for is to take care of each other. And we acknowledge that we can't do anything alone, and that part of being a human being is that we are built to share our journeys with others. Being newly ordained, I've obviously been thinking a lot about what it means to do that sort of thing professionally and not as a lay member, because I think that in the preceding words, I made a pretty good case that ministry is not absolutely necessary because we're all doing it all of the time. And I think I made a good case that ministry is always mutual and communal. And there are many, many UU communities that don't have paid ministers and who would agree with that it's not necessary to have a vibrant community. And so the joke I often tell that's not really a joke, I think we all have those, is that I became a minister so that I could do church all the time instead of just fitting it around my job. I wanted church to be my job. And I think that speaks to the idea that I'm not special, I just really like church. And the priesthood of all believers, to go back to that, coming to us from Martin Luther, he was responding to an idea that the priest was an intermediary between human beings and God, and that to some extent, in that exchange, a priest would represent God and facilitate the rituals of the community. And he said, no, the priest represents the people in interactions with God. The priest is raised up by the people, not chosen by God. And we've inherited that. The idea that ministry is seen by peers. And so while many of us UU ministers feel a sense of call and talk about it, that call is often coming from the communities we live in, just as much as from something greater than ourselves. And I would say that I do feel a personal call, but that call wasn't real until communities affirmed my talents and gifts, or helped me grow into the talents I didn't have yet. The community recognized something in me, not a bishop, but all of you, and the people at my internship congregation and my home congregation and other communities I've been a part of over the years. This church has done any number of ordinations, so many of you know that it is the right and privilege of the congregation to ordain a minister. And this speaks to me of that sense of communal recognition, of the partnership, collaboration, and shared journey. To continue the communal line of thought with James Luther Adams, he wrote, "We've long held to the priesthood of all believers, the idea that all believers have direct access to the ultimate resources of the religious life, and that every believer has the responsibility of achieving an explicit faith for free persons. As an element of the radical laicism, we need also a firm belief in the prophethood of all believers. The prophetic liberal church is not a church where the prophetic function is assigned merely to the few. The prophetic church is the church in which persons think and work together to interpret the signs of the times in the light of their faith, to make explicit through discussion the epochal thinking that the times demand." And so this week, Unitarian Universalists across the country gathered at our annual General Assembly. And this gathering always includes attention to issues of justice, to social issues. And there are democratic votes adopting various statements of conscience every year. And every year there are workshops to teach us how to organize, to be empowered, and to empower others to work for change. And at the local level, the same democratic patterns guide our individual congregations in how we choose our focus and how we choose what to fund and where to work. Our moral and our ethical positions are not dictated by 2,000 years of history, though they may be informed by them, nor are they decided and pronounced by some hierarchical authority. These are grassroots positions bubbling up from the people in response to the world changing around them. And so it's important to remember that nothing that happens in this building or beyond this building happens alone. I show up on Sunday morning and I hope I offer you something interesting or wise or thought-provoking, perhaps an experience that touches your heart or spirit. But I never do it alone. I do it with other staff folks, I do it with musicians, I do it with tech volunteers, with all the speakers and writers and thinkers that led me to create a Sunday morning, and I do it with all of you. We experience our service together. We join our voices in song and speech. We share pieces of ourselves through our joys and our sorrows. We pray together. We breathe together. Those tech folks are reaching out to people who can't be here in person, and you too are singing and speaking and breathing with us. Beyond Sunday morning, for every phone call or visit I make to someone in this community, there are many more being made by all of you. There are meals being made for friends, rides to appointments, cards being sent. We take care of each other. Other people bring leadership skills, organizing skills, teaching skills, musical and artistic gifts, and their bright spirits into this place every week and every day. And our passions, our talents, and our skills combine to create something beautiful. And so we are always fellow travelers. We might walk some portions of our life journey alone, but never the whole. And a minister may take on large portions of that companionship, but most of the time we're joined by many people, friends and acquaintances across all of the moments, large and small, that make up our lives. This is my last Sunday morning with all of you. I'll have a few more days to tidy my desk in my office, clean out my email, all of those things, and somehow bring some measure of closure to many of my relationships too. And then after that, I have to pack, so I'm trying not to think about that. This is in many ways a bridging for me. It's a threshold, a moment of transition, where I'm closing out one adventure so that I can launch into the next. We use flowers in many of our ceremonies, not just for our recent flower communion, but for our bridgers, we often give a rose with its thorns. It symbolizes the roses we gave at our baby dedication that are stripped of thorns, that now adults going out into the world have to protect themselves a little bit. But the important thing is that at every stage, the roses have not fully bloomed. We're acknowledging that we all bloom in our own time and in our own way, and that it can't be forced. It happens when it's time for it to happen, just like all the other moments of change in our lives. Those moments occur on their own schedule, at their own pace, and often in direct opposition to whatever plans I may have made for myself. And our recent flower communion reminded us of how we are together every Sunday, Flowers in different shapes and sizes, different stages of bloom, coming together for a brief time in a moment of sharing. Each one of us brings that beauty. Each one of us has the ability to listen and be present with someone who needs to be heard and held. Each one of us has wisdom to offer. Each one of us has a story of our own personal encounters with the sacred or the holy that we can share with our larger community. Each one of us has our own particular passions for justice, and when we bring those together into a whole, they form a comprehensive response to the world. Each of us brings our gifts to this community in the forms of our talents, our time, and yes, our treasure too. But the Flower Communion also reminds us that that isn't a gift to a faceless community, it's our gift to one another. And in giving and receiving, we are transformed every Sunday. I'm very grateful for the opportunity to accompany all of you for this year because it has changed me. I told stories in worship before I came here, but here is where I became a storyteller, doing it week after week. And I had so many opportunities to think about and experiment with integrating some of our younger folks into worship, trying things to see what might work. And in that, you have honored my creativity and my voice, and I am so, so grateful. The weird thing about ministry that I don't think we understand when we start seminary is that it's work and it's a job, but it's not just work and it's not just a job, because it's people and relationships. For us as ministers, it is just as much building a home together, this thing that we do together. And the challenge for us, or at least for me, is to stay in it and stay present, knowing that it will end. To remain authentic and present and accompany you for as long as we are together, regardless of the expiration date, because all ministries do end. Even in the old days when ministers never left their congregations, we are mortal and ministries ended. And I think this year, many of us have been aware of the ticking clock. Many of you have watched me search for my own settled ministry position. And I've had a little bit of practice saying goodbye, first leaving my home congregation and then my internship. But my more experienced colleagues tell me it does not actually get easier with time, because we put down roots. And I've put down some roots during my time here, and now I have to pull them up one by one to make my way into a larger world. And in doing this, in uprooting myself, I am reminded that accompaniment is always mutual, for ministers too. It's not exactly the same, and there are different boundaries around it, but you have accompanied me on my journey. Journeying together is a mutual act. And that's not a thing that can be easily undone. And so there are pieces of you that I will carry with me, just as I hope that some of you will carry pieces of me. And so again, thank you for the time that we have spent together. And thank you for accompanying me on this particular stage of my own journey. Prophets and pastors and priests among us, thank you all for the ministry that you do collectively. Know that whatever lies ahead for you, First Parish in Cambridge, as a community, that you have within you all that you need. Remember that all ministry is collective and collaborative. Notice and honor the gifts that are brought into this place. And in that work, notice also the transformative power of Unitarian Universalism, the power of the faith that we have in ourselves and in one another. Trust that we are enough. And know that together you will all transform one another and take that transformative power into the world beyond our doors. And I close with a final reading from the Reverend Gordon McKeeman. Ministry is that quality of being in community that affirms human dignity, beckons forth hidden possibilities, invites us into deeper, more constant, reverent relationships, and carries forward our heritage of hope and liberation. Ministry is what we do together as we celebrate triumphs of our human spirit, miracles of birth and life, wonders of devotion and sacrifice. Ministry is what we do together with one another in terror and torment, in grief, in misery and pain, enabling us in the presence of death to say yes to life. We who minister speak and live the best we know with full knowledge that it is never quite enough, and yet are reassured by lostness found, fragments reunited, wounds healed, and joy shared. Ministry is what we all do together.